Hello everyone. Today I'm going to be painting a Begonia Escargot, which is a sort of old-fashioned variety hybrid of Rex Begonia. It's known for this snail-shaped curling to the leaf, and it's sort of an unusual color, which is going to be a fun challenge to paint. The colors are very subtle. It's got this nice silvery colors to the leaf that we're going to have to mix quite a few things together to get that colors. Some of the colors that I'm thinking we might want to use here include Cerulean Blue, which is always good for subtle mixes, and soft greens and silvery greens. This is Chromium Oxide Green, which is definitely a color we're going to want to use in this painting. Kind of grayish green, not very bright, and very subtle and soft. So those two together going to give us a grayish, silvery, subtle green tone, which is perfect for those central areas of the leaf. And then to kind of counterbalance that and provide a complementary tone, a color I like to use is Cobalt Violet. And even though there's not really any purple or violet in the leaf, this is our complementary mixing color. So when we mix those together, you get really a gray color basically. So we'll see what that looks like in the painting. Start with a very light underpainting and not go very dark. So I'm just looking at the almost quilted, the texture of this leaf, and just focusing on the lightest areas of the leaf. And if I go too dark on anything, I've got my paper towel. I can lift things back out and just get the impression of what I'm seeing here. Following the veins a little bit. I've got my drawing that I did earlier mapped out, and we'll just go right over top the pencil. And this stage is very loose impressionistic painting, not worrying about the fine detail, just looking at color and texture, and very importantly leaving quite a bit of white. Don't want to go too dark because you can't go back to the paper completely once you've painted it. There's two main areas in this leaf. There's a darker tone on the edges in the center, and there's that light tone between the dark areas that I just did. So now I'm going to look at that darker color and what colors we want to think about mixing for that. That's an even trickier color to mix actually than the light color. Definitely in the green family, but it's very dull. Like I did before, using Cobalt Violet mixed with green, colors are sort of opposite of each other on the color wheel, so you immediately get some gray tones happening. Ultramarine Violet, we want this to go darker. This is a dark violet blue tone, and I'm just adjusting as I go. And we probably need more green, so let's try green gold. So I'm just mixing green gold and ultramarine violet. I like that a lot. That's sort of an olive green, but very dull, very blue. I don't even know what you call that color actually, but to me it looks like what we're aiming for. And there's so much texture in begonias especially, but most leaves really. We don't want everything to just look flat. So what I like to do is, even as I go, make sure that there's some variation in the brush strokes. Lift paint up a little bit, make sure that everything looks varied and interesting and not just a flat wash. We want to make sure that this escargot curly part in the center of the leaf really sticks out, because that's what the leaf is famous for. So, and the reference, this part is darker. So we're gonna use more of the ultramarine violet, darker blue color. Okay, so we've let the painting dry for a few minutes, and we are going to go in with another layer in the light silvery part, and we use a similar color to what we did the first time, and I'm just going to mix a bit more of that. And You'll notice on my palette, everything really always starts to blend together. I'm not very good at keeping things separate, but that's fine because as long as things don't get too muddy and you have an idea of what you're working towards and what colors you're using, then it kind of keeps things harmonious, I think. Okay, and we're gonna go back into the painting, and this time, instead of that really loose style of painting, I'm gonna pay more attention to the reference and specifically the veining on this begonia. So this is a reference photo I took at a local nursery a couple of months ago when I was specifically looking for begonias that I wanted to paint. And I don't see escargot around very often. I didn't buy it because every time I try to grow Rex begonias, their leaves get all infected and they just don't grow very well here in our very humid climate outdoors. And I'm just pulling out, still very quite light with the tip of my brush. I'm going to pull out some of these vein structures, connect the inside of the leaf to the outside shapes. And I'm going to go back into that silvery area with that same color, and again, looking closely at my reference, that almost metallic texture, try to recreate with a bunch of brush strokes and bring out that three-dimensional look in between each vein. The combination of the darker color I'm adding now and the lighter base tones that we added in the first stage will start to make it look like it's not quite reflective in the real leaf, but definitely has that almost crinkled aluminum foil feel or something like that. Okay, so now we're going to do the same thing with some of the darker tones, not too solidly, still using a kind of medium brush, keeping it small brush strokes, following the veining and the texture of the leaf. Try to maintain that crinkled look of the leaf, but adding in some darker tones. Into these central areas where the veins come out from the center of the leaf, here under the central curl. And we're getting close to some of the darkest tones in our reference. Not quite to the darkest colors yet, but we're getting there. Only on the second layer, really, of this painting. And then we'll come back in a little bit and get those final details. Okay, that looks pretty good. Now we're going to work our way out to the border of the leaf, which is pretty much the same color, but tends a little lighter and it trends towards the green. The dominant color here in the very center is that green gold, what I talked about. It's a very nice color that I just started using fairly recently. It's exactly how it sounds. It's a very warm, golden hued green color. It's great for mixing. I'm just looking at my reference while I do this. I'm going to work my way all the way around the edge of the leaf. So I want to maintain this area in the top, which is lighter and a little bit of shiny highlight. So I'm not going to go too dark up here. I'm just gonna finish off this layer of darker paint, and that's stage 2. Now that we've got the tones established and the colors that are pretty close to what we want to represent in the final painting, we really want to go in and look at the details and the reference. In this begonia leaf we're looking at, there's all these little hairs, there's some really fine veins. I'm going to switch to a smaller brush. We'll stick with more or less the same colors. There are a few hairs and things that are kind of purplish or red, and we'll mix up some colors for those as well. But from here on out, it's all about the fine detail. So I'm going to start by going back into the veins for a little bit and look closely at those. Now that I've got the veins all sorted out, I'm going to go into the center area here where the spiral comes to a point and really emphasize the difference between the darker shade and the lighter, more yellow shade. So that pops out by increasing the contrast between that light and dark. So I'm adding some detail into the silvery light area here. Like many begonias, there are little hair-like structures that I'm going to start including in. Now that we're in the final detail stages of the painting, kind of get some of that texture in there. Okay, now I'm going to go back in with my detail brush here. I'm going to look at the very edge of this leaf and really pay attention and clean that up with some very fine detail and small brush strokes with this nice dark bluish green mixture. And now I'm working back into this very center here in our darkest areas. We really want the spiral part of the leaf to stick out. So we'll emphasize this little bit of a shadow with some of our darkest color. We'll go back into the center of the spiral with the lighter green and add some detail into there as well. Very closely at my reference, I see these little hairs all over the leaf, and especially along the edges, they're very visible. The best way to paint these hairs for me is with a little bit of gouache. So I'm going to get a separate palette out. I don't like to mix gouache on the same palette because it's opaque and it'll muddy my watercolors. And we want to make sure that anything like this comes at the very end of the painting, because we are not going to want to go back in with dark green fluid watercolor on top of fine details like this, because it would just blend them around and make a mess. Gouache is very interesting to paint with and blend because when you first apply it, it looks very bold and your brush strokes look very light, but they almost always, as they dry, kind of mix with the layer underneath. So the dry gouache never looks the same as the wet gouache, so it's something you've got to get used to. And I'm just adding these slightly reddish hairs, particularly on the edge, but a few on the inside of the leaf with my fine detail brush. Now, one of the last things I want to do is push the shadows and the depth of this leaf a little bit more with a wash of Cobalt Blue. And I'm going to do a very light wash, just a little bit of pigment and a lot of water, and go right on top of this leaf texture here, and be careful not to interrupt any of the detail underneath by using a very light touch. And this transparent, slightly darker wash, just in a few selective places, will push a little bit more depth into the leaf and make it look more three-dimensional. But it will also allow the detail and the texture that we already have in there to show through. And that's our Begonia Escargot. Begonia leaves can be challenging, but when you pack in all of the detail and have a good piece of reference that you follow closely, I think they're very rewarding and a lot of fun. Be sure to like the video, follow the channel, and I'll have a new tutorial soon. Thanks for watching.